The first time I saw her, she was marching down the dock like she owned the place. Sun hat pulled tight, clipboard in hand, and lips pursed so thin they looked like they were strangling her face. Every step she took clicked like a metronome of disapproval, tapping against the wooden planks of the marina that had been my home away from home for over 15 years. Her name was Karen, of course, because what else could it have been? I had just tied off my boat, the Liberty Star, after an afternoon fishing run. She eyed me like I was trespassing in her living room. The irony was thick enough to choke on, but I didn't say a word at first. I watched her circle me and the boat like a shark that didn't know it was about to swim into a harpoon. "You can't dock here," she announced finally, planting her clipboard against her hip like it was some kind of sheriff's badge. I glanced around at the empty slips. There were at least 20 open spaces, and I had been docking at the same spot for a decade. "Funny," I said slowly. "I've been docking here longer than you've probably been complaining to managers." Her nostrils flared. "This is HOA property now. We don't allow random boats to clutter the marina." I laughed, and not the polite kind. It was the deep belly kind of laugh that makes people bristle. "Random boats? Lady, that's a 38-foot cabin cruiser. It's worth more than your house." Wrong thing to say. Her face turned a shade of red that could scare off a bull. "I'll have you fined, and if you don't move it, I'll have it towed." Now, here's the thing about me. I don't lose my cool easy. Years in the Navy taught me patience, discipline, and the fine art of keeping a poker face while the other guy folds. But when someone like Karen, armed with nothing but self-importance and a neighborhood gossip chain, tries to tell me where I can park my own boat, well, that's when the game begins. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just nodded, tipped my hat, and said, "You do what you think you gotta do." Her heels clicked away, satisfied she'd won. But I knew something she didn't, something she would never see coming. Because the marina she was claiming as HOA property, the docks, the slips, the boathouse, the fueling station, they didn't belong to her little homeowners association. They belonged to me. Every last piling of wood, every board, every square inch of water rights, paid for in full when I bought out the previous owner 5 years back. I let the marina run itself under a management company, kept my name off the day-to-day, and enjoyed the luxury of being just another boater. Nobody ever bothered me. Nobody knew the truth, until Karen showed up with her clipboard. The next few days were amusing. Flyers started appearing in windshields in the marina parking lot. Bold letters at the top screamed, "Community cleanup, ban unsightly boats." At the bottom, in messy cursive, was her signature as HOA compliance chair. She didn't just want my boat gone. She wanted all the older boats gone. Anything that didn't meet her aesthetic standard. Anything that didn't look like it came straight out of a yacht magazine. I watched her confront retirees, fishermen, and even a young couple who had scraped together their savings to buy a little sailboat. She wagged her finger in faces, threatened fines she had no authority to give, and called the sheriff so many times the deputy stopped responding to her calls. The marina, once peaceful, started buzzing with resentment. People grumbled, tempers flared, but most didn't have the means to fight back. HOA boards have a way of scaring people into silence. But me? I had patience and leverage. I let her keep digging her grave. I let her strut around with her clipboard, writing imaginary citations, telling people the HOA would clean up this eyesore of a dock. Then came the night that lit the fuse. It was a Friday evening, the sun melting into the horizon and turning the lake gold. I was sitting on the Liberty Star's deck, beer in hand, when I heard shouting. Karen was on the dock again, this time with 2 other HOA board members in tow. She was pointing at my boat, practically foaming at the mouth. "That one," she barked, "that's the worst of them. It's filthy, it's oversized, and it does not belong here." One of the men with her hesitated. "Karen, I don't know if we have the authority." She cut him off with a hiss. "Don't be weak. The bylaws say we control all common areas, and this marina is part of the subdivision." "Not exactly," I said, stepping off the deck and onto the dock. My voice carried just enough weight for all three to turn. She sneered. "Oh, look, it's the squatter." I smiled. "You might want to double-check those bylaws before you go trying to tow someone's boat." She jabbed a finger at me. "Tomorrow morning, you and that rust bucket are gone. If you're not, we'll call a tow company and we'll fine you every day it stays." "Fine me?" I echoed. "That's rich." She spun on her heel and stormed off again, the two board members trailing reluctantly behind her. I stood there, staring out at the water, the gold of sunset fading into dark blue. My patience had run its course. Enough was enough. The next morning, Karen showed up with her clipboard, a camera, and a tow truck parked at the Marina entrance. She had an audience, half a dozen residents who had no idea what was about to unfold. I walked calmly down the dock, papers in hand. She started yelling before I even reached her. "You're trespassing. This is HOA property, and we're enforcing our rules. Remove your boat immediately." That's when I pulled out the deed. Thick packet, notarized, official. I held it up for everyone to see. "Funny thing, Karen," I said, my voice carrying across the water. "This marina doesn't belong to the HOA. It belongs to me. Every slip, every dock, every right-of-way. Paid for in full when I bought out the previous owner 5 years back. I let the marina run itself under a management company, kept my name off the day-to-day, and enjoyed the luxury of being just another boater. Nobody ever bothered me. Nobody knew the truth, until Karen showed up with her clipboard. And that was just the beginning. The crowd on the dock fell quiet, as if the water itself had swallowed their breath. Karen stood with a color gone from her face that no sun hat could fix. The tow truck driver, who'd been warming up his rig at the edge of the lot, looked at me, then at the papers, then at the cluster of neighbors holding the deed like a hot potato. A murmur rippled through them, part confusion, part vindication, part the slow, dawning realization that they'd been used as props in someone else's performance.
"You can't," she started, and the words sounded tiny, like they were escaping from the inside of a mouthful of gravel. Her confidence, that swagger she'd practiced for months, had vanished like fog in a noon heat. For the first time since she'd arrived with her clipboard, she looked uncertain. "Look," I said, as gentle as I could manage under the circumstances, "I want this place to run well. I want the marina tidy and safe. But I won't have people bullied, and I won't have lies told to get what you want. If you have concerns, there's a process. Talk to me, not scream to the town gossip and expect everyone else to shiver." She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. The HOA board members shifted their feet. Faces from the crowd turned toward them. Tow-headed kids, retirees with fishing licenses worn soft from decades of use. Young couples with sunburned forearms who'd bought those little sailboats and mended them with hope. They all looked like they'd been waiting for someone to tell them the truth, and now the truth had arrived like a slow, deliberate tide. Someone clapped, not loud, not rude, just one slow, resonant clap that sounded like permission. Then another. The clapping spread, tentative at first, then with more conviction. Karen's cheeks flushed a new shade, embarrassment bleeding into anger. "You'll be held accountable for harassment. I'll sue. The HOA will—" "You can try. But before you spend other people's dues on lawyers, there are a few things you might want to think about." I folded my arms and let the dock creak under the weight of my patience. "For starters, the marina's rules are mine to make. I've kept them reasonable. No liveaboard without permits, no commercial fishing without a license, quiet hours at night. But I'll also say this. If the HOA wants to form a liaison committee, I'll sit with them. If they want to propose aesthetic standards, we'll discuss them like adults. But they don't get to threaten people and call tow trucks on a whim." One of the older men, George, who'd been at the marina before my name was on any deed, stepped forward. He had a face lined like a map of every river he'd ever crossed. "We've been afraid to speak up," he said. "She comes into our lives like she's got the law at her back. Took my neighbor to tears last month. He's a veteran. She told him his boat was an eyesore and he should move the damn thing. Told him if he didn't, she'd have him fined. He doesn't know fine from fee. We didn't know what to do. Now you know, and you can do something. I looked at Karen again. You want this to be a friendly little community, or you want to be the person at the center of every argument? You can't have both. She stuttered, this property. Her hand floated toward the deed like some desperate prayer to the paper. You can't just... She's right about one thing, said a voice behind her, and everyone turned. It was Marisol, the HOA treasurer, a woman used to numbers and ledgers and the muscle memory of balancing budgets. She'd been Karen's ally for months, but her voice wasn't the yes siren it used to be. Legally, Karen, you don't have the authority to order anyone's boat removed from here. We can't fine people for property we don't own. We voted on a motion last winter to explore partnership options, but that never meant ownership, it meant outreach. Karen's mouth was a pistol with no powder. You'll regret this, she muttered. Will what? I asked. Make a spectacle? Drag this into court and waste months? Fine, we'll see each other there. I let the words hang because sometimes the clean, cold calendar of a courtroom is the exact opposite of whatever theatric someone wants to use as a club. But hear me now, if you keep bullying people, if you keep fabricating authority and scaring retirees into paying tow fees for boats they've had since their children were kids, I will not hesitate to protect this community with everything I have. That got their attention. Not because I'd threatened legal action, that was a language Karen tried to speak and failed, but because the man who owned the marina had just offered the dock back to the people who used it. He was saying, in plain words, that the marina's heartbeat belonged to the regulars, not to the paper pushers. The next week became a choreography of small, sharp moves. I called him meeting, a proper meeting advertised with mailed notices and posted signs on the marina bulletin board. I invited the HOA, the residents, local law enforcement, and a mediator, a retired municipal attorney who'd once run small claims courts and had a wry way of deflating hot heads with a single question. I made sure press coverage would be minimally intrusive but transparent. There's no better disinfectant for rumors than sunlight. Karen arrived in full armor, pearls that could have paid for a week's rent for 3 couples in the marina lot, a blazer starched to a hostile point, and a smile that landed somewhere between forced and feral. She came with a binder of evidence, handwritten complaint notes, a printout of neighborhood rules from 5 years ago that were clearly irrelevant, and a list of potential fines she'd drafted with the confidence of someone who'd never checked a municipal code. The mediator, an efficient man named Hawthorne, opened the meeting with his practiced small-town manner. We're not here to villainize anyone. We're here to get the facts on the table and find a path forward. And the facts were simple. The marina belonged to me. The HOA did not own the docks or the slips. They had no authority to call tow trucks. They certainly had no authority to levy fines on property they did not own. But the social authority, Karen's ability to intimidate people into compliance, was the one Achilles heel that no deed could fix on its own. Residents told their stories. A chorus of quiet indignation rose as people shared the small cruelties. Letters slipped under doors about safety violations that included photos of weathered paint. Anonymity tips phoned to the county inspector claiming leaky sewage when the problem was an old bilge pump. A complaint filed that a fisherman's tarp was an unsightly hazard, even though it kept his nets and livelihood dry. And just as you thought Hawthorne might ask for his own share of visibility for all the work this would take, he cleared his throat and said, "Karen, you've wondered what your options are. I think your options are very narrow."
It was ugly in a polite way. People dabbed at eyes and cleared throats. Watching those confessions, I felt a hot tenderness for the marina folk. They were not just clients. They were the reason the place existed. They were the slow, steady pulse that kept my investment alive. I'd bought the marina to preserve a way of life, not to gentrify it. When it was Karen's turn, she tried to use volume as a shield. "I'm just protecting property values," she declared. "If we allow clutter and old boats, the subdivision will decline. I'm doing a service." "You're doing what you think is a service," Hawthorne said.
eyes kind but unforgiving. But service doesn't come with intimidation. Service comes with transparency, proof, and community consent. He proposed, and the crowd agreed, a binding agreement, a Marina code co-created by the owner and the HOA, a liaison committee that included an elected representative from the Marina users, transparent complaint procedures, and mandatory mediation before any tow or fine. It was inclusive and practical, a document designed to slam the door on unilateral action. Karen could have agreed and taken a role on the liaison committee, potentially leading change in a constructive way. She refused. That was her first real mistake. Refusing made her a caricature, the woman who was for rules except when they curbed her instincts. People started to look at her not as a protector of the neighborhood, but as the chaos she brought. She filed suit anyway, claiming harassment and slander, a paper storm intended to cow me into settlement. Her legal notice was ornate, punctuation like daggers. It was also shallow. The more she leaned on it, the more her credibility crumbled. I answered every claim with crisp, unyielding documents. I produced tax receipts, purchase agreements, environmental permits, insurance policies. I'd always kept good records. There's a discipline in running a marina that rewards paperwork. The courts liked clarity. The judge liked clarity. The judge's clerk, later at a community barbecue, told me with an amused smile that Karen's filings read like a high school play where everyone forgot their lines and the set fell apart between acts. Meanwhile, the marina hummed back to life, but now with a new air. Nobody wanted to be cowed into silence. People who'd been stepping lightly came forward, proposing volunteer cleanups, boat maintenance classes, and a kids' summer sailing program. I matched funding for a community chest to improve the docks, new wood where rot had eaten, brighter life rings, upgraded lighting, even a small educational plaque about the lake's ecosystem we installed near the boathouse. The marina wasn't going to be a monument to nostalgia. It would be a living thing that welcomed everyone. And Karen? She doubled down. She held emergency HOA meetings and histrionic bake sales that felt less and less like community and more like performance art. She posted angry messages on neighborhood forums, each more unhinged than the last, accusing me of secretly planning to commercialize the marina and of staging a hostile takeover. She made each post with the same zeal as a woman possessed. The more she screamed, the quieter the neighbors became. There was one evening that crystallized everything. A summer storm came up fast. Black water, wind like a freight train, rain sideways like needles. The marina shuddered under the assault. A small sailboat, one of the community's older vessels, snapped its mooring and drifted toward the channel, its mast a lonely flag in the squall. I was out there in minutes. So were half a dozen regulars. We launched a small skiff and threaded the wind, bobbing on waves like a walnut in coffee. Karen stood in her driveway, umbrella useless in her hand, watching as the boats and people she'd tried to control moved with a kind of practiced courage. We rescued the sailboat and, soaked to the bone, hauled it back to its slip. The neighbor who owned it, Miguel, came up to me and put a hand on my shoulder. "You should have seen her," he said, voice hoarse with adrenaline. "She was on her porch shouting that we should have paid more for safety, that we were being reckless. When the boat started going, where was she? On her porch." What she does is for the audience. But when the water gets real, people turn to the ones who can handle it. Word of the rescue spread. It was small, nothing cinematic, but it punctured her persona. The narrative changed. Karen is the loudmouth on the porch. The marina community is the ones who show up when things matter. Social media, once her favorite stage, turned. Neighbors posted photos of people in rain-soaked jackets hauling rope, of kids passing out blankets, of the old fishermen roasting the soaked crew on the rigging with jokes to keep morale up. Hashtags flowered like marsh grass. Hashtag Marina Strong. Hashtag Neighbors Not Noise. The local news ran a short piece. Local marina community pulls together during storm. The anchor smiled as if the heartwarming part of the human condition had been rediscovered. Court dates came and went like the seasons. Paper was exchanged. Testimony was taken. Karen's case sputtered because it had no teeth. Her claims of harassment were undercut by her own recorded messages, most of which she didn't realize were being captured, where she admitted she had no legal standing but was doing what needed to be done. Depositions are honest things. They have a way of exposing the gap between what people say in public and what they do in private. By the time the judge issued his summary judgment, ruling that Karen and the HOA had no authority to tow or fine Marina patrons and that they could not present themselves as owners, the HOA's membership had quietly shifted. People used the liaison committee we'd proposed. They elected a new compliance chair who understood both the letter and the spirit of the law. The Marina Code became a real document with input from fishermen and families and the clause that prohibited frivolous complaints. It was not punitive, it was practical. And Karen? She tried to appeal. Legal maneuvers require money and stamina. At first, she tapped the HOA's petty cash, then raided her own savings, then the savings of her sister-in-law, who had been roped into the fight with promises of being on the right side of history. The appeal sputtered out when the HOA voted, overwhelmingly, to stop funding her legal crusade. People were tired of conflict. They wanted their lake back.
Humiliation, when curated by yourself, is its own punishment. Karen's name became shorthand for overreach. Teenagers made memes. A teacher used her as an example in a civics class about the misuse of soft power. She found herself increasingly alone. The HOA board, exasperated with the fallout, voted her off the compliance committee. The same neighbors who'd once hung on her every word now crossed the street to avoid her glance. But I'm not a monster. Revenge is satisfying in the immediate way of a meal, but it spoils if you try to keep it reheated on the stove. My aim wasn't to humiliate. It was to restore dignity to a place that had been eroded by small cruelties. So when the dust settled, I did the unexpected. I extended an olive branch. One autumn afternoon, after the judge's ruling and after the new Marina Code had been ratified, I asked Karen to meet me on the dock. Whispers circulated. Some thought I'd gloat. She arrived, slow, defensive, her eyes cataloging every plank, apparently certain this was a setup. When you've been in the position of moral advantage, you learn to sniff out traps. I offered her a cup of coffee. She stared at it like it was a foreign object. "Why?" she asked, flinty. "Because this place is bigger than any one of us," I said. "Because all that noise took time and cost us civility. You clearly care about the neighborhood, I get that. But the way you went about it, lying, threats, that isn't how we move forward." I didn't accuse her of malice. I suggested a different origin. Fear. People who lash out are often trying to anchor themselves. She scoffed. "You think a cup of coffee fixes that?" "No," I said, "but it's a start." She took the coffee like a dare and burned her tongue on the first sip. We both laughed at that. The laugh was brittle, but it was a laugh. We talked clumsily about bylaws and aesthetics and the difference between stewardship and control. She tried embarrassingly to explain herself, her fear of decline, the way she'd watched property values wobble in a different town and didn't want the same thing here. The truths she offered were small and human. A childhood in a house that lost its paint, a father who taught her to notice order. They didn't excuse her behavior, but they explained it. By the time the coffee went cold and her elbows had a ring of salt on them from the lake spray, she said something I hadn't expected. "I didn't mean to hurt people," she said softly. "I just thought rules would help." "Rules help when they're fair," I said, "and when people make them, together." We never became friends. That wasn't the point. But she stopped showing up at meetings like a hurricane. She started attending the liaison committee as an observer, and I watched as her posture softened in the presence of people who actually listened to the fishermen and not just to her. She volunteered one weekend to help repaint the community shed.
Her hands were clumsy with a brush, but she showed up. That small act, no one noticed but the people there, was more restorative than any public apology. Life at the marina settled into a new rhythm. The kids' sailing program grew. One of its graduates won a local regatta and held the trophy like a small son. Couples who'd considered moving away because of the noise decided to stay. People planted native reeds at the shoreline, and the fish returned in ways that made anglers swear in reverent tones. The docks were newly planked and safer. At night, the lights were gentler, and you could hear laughter threaded through the sound of water lapping against hulls. As for me, I kept running the marina with the same patient attention to detail. I found joy in the small things, guiding a nervous teenager through knot tying, teaching an old man the new GPS system, laughing with someone who'd once been too timid to speak. The place that had once been a battleground became a meeting place again, and the lake took on the easy patience of things that need no authority to be themselves. The final scene I remember is ordinary and ridiculous and perfect of the place. A summer day, years after the initial fights, when the water was a sheet of mercury and the sun made the hulls shine like coins. There was a family picnic on the dock. A few teenagers were pulling a raft with a dog that delighted in being dragged through the water. Karen, now older, softer at the edges, sat near the boathouse knitting something ridiculous, a life jacket cover that looked suspiciously like a sweater. She handed me a cup of lemonade and said, without guile, "You were right. It's better when people talk." I looked at the marina, at the parade of boats bobbing gently, at the kids learning to sail under a volunteer instructor with calloused hands, and felt the long, slow warmth of accountability done right. This wasn't triumph as a shout. It was triumph as an evening breeze across a peaceful harbor. There's an old lesson sailors learn. The sea is not conquered, it is negotiated with. You read its moods, you trim your sails, and sometimes you accept that the only control you have is how you respond. I had used the law and the ledger and the patient accumulation of truth to change the tide. I'd exposed a bully and rebuilt a bridge. Revenge, when it's done well, doesn't leave destruction in its wake. It leaves correction. It restores balance rather than merely taking from the other side. That's the kind of victory that lasts longer than a headline or a meme. It shows up in the next season's bloom and the repaired cleat that doesn't pull free. When night falls on the marina now and the lamps make little moons on the water, people walk the docks together. The Liberty Star rocks quietly in its slip, polished and proud. There are new boats and boats that look as if they've been saved by stubborn hands and stubborn love. The lake keeps its own counsel. It forgives easily and remembers everything in its slow way. And Karen? She kept her house. She kept her voice. She learned in time that stewardship requires humility. Sometimes I still see her at community events, a little less sure of herself, a little more willing to listen. We nod. We do not need to be enemies. We are, in the end, neighbors. That was the lesson the marina taught me, that the good fight is not the one that leaves the field scorched, but the one that, when the smoke clears, leaves room for people to return and rebuild.